So there's a lot of information that's been coming out about World of Warcraft Midnight, and a lot of it looks really good, but there's one thing in particular about this new expansion that, at least in my opinion, seems like a little bit of a problem. And it's something that a lot of you probably aren't going to care too much about, but as somebody that's been playing this game for 20 years, it's something of great significance to me. So a small little rant video, just going to share my thoughts, and you guys can share yours in the comment section down below. So recently over on Twitter, I saw a conversation happening regarding the future of Eversong Woods, and one of the topics that came up was the issue of the Dead Scar. Now, for those that don't know, the Dead Scar is a very iconic location in Quel'thalas, and it marks the path that Arthas and the Scourge took during the events of Warcraft 3 as they marched on the capital city of Silvermoon. And of course, the reason why they were doing this was so that Arthas could access the Sunwell, so that way he could use its magical power to bring the necromancer Quel'thalas back to life. For Blood Elf players over all these years, the Dead Scar has represented a type of nostalgia. It has been a source of pride for the Blood Elves, and it's also been a very sobering reminder of what happened to the Blood Elves as a people in Warcraft lore. Speaking only for myself, I really like playing Blood Elves, and I've always looked at the Dead Scar and the lore surrounding it of what the Sin'dorei went through and how, despite the destruction of their kingdom, they were still resolute in the face of death. They still stood firm, and they were able to rebuild their civilization in the years to come, despite the majority of them being wiped out. And the best part is, according to the lore that was established in TBC, the Dead Scar is an irreversible, scar on Quel'thalas that can never be undone. Or at least that was the case until World of Warcraft Midnight, because what we're seeing so far is that the Dead Scar has been restored in this updated Quel'thalas. So that lore of like, hey, this is irreversible damage to the land, we can't heal it, that's all out the window now. You even had some elves in Eversong Woods and in the Ghostlands talking about how, hey, because this damage to our land is permanent and irreversible, we might as well just go find our destiny out in Outland. And I always thought that was very interesting, at least from a writing perspective. Now, this discussion that I found on Twitter and this revelation that apparently the Dead Scar has been healed now, all that lore that was established back in TBC, it really got me thinking about something that I have thought about many times over the past several years, and most likely you've probably thought about it too the past several years if you're a veteran World of Warcraft player. And that is this. Over these years, Blizzard seems to be continuously either forgetting their old lore, trying to change the old lore that they've already established, or the big one is they're trying to take their old lore and vibe and tone that they established with World of Warcraft, and they're trying to throw it out the window. Like, we don't write like that anymore. We don't do stories like that. We have a whole new message, a whole new thing that we're trying to communicate through World of Warcraft. And admittingly, sometimes it can get a little bit frustrating. First of all, changing old lore. I really hate when Blizzard just retcons stuff that they've already established years ago. When Blizzard does a bit of world building, a lot of people that love Warcraft lore like me really consume this because it really brings us into Azeroth in a whole new way and makes us appreciate the world that Blizzard has constructed. So when they then, a few years later, or however long it's been, when they say, no, never mind, we're just gonna retcon that, we're just gonna pretend like we never said that, it's very frustrating because sometimes, even like in lore discussion communities and stuff, you don't really know what's actually canon and what's not canon. For example, did any of you by chance own this book back in the day, the World of Warcraft role-playing game book? Well, if you did, you would know that there was a ton of lore that Blizzard established in this book that really brought the races and cultures and classes to Azeroth to life in a whole new way. For example, did you know that night elves are polygamous? That's right. Night Elf males have multiple wives in established Night Elf lore. Actually, never mind, Blizzard retconned that. I remember back in the day thinking about that, and I was like, that's interesting. You know, the Night Elf males, typically they're druids, they sleep in the Emerald Dream, and you see that like the Night Elf government is primarily female. You know, Tyrande obviously leads the priesthood of Elune, that whole sisterhood and stuff. Then you also have the Sentinels, which is primarily a female organization that's led by Chandra's Feathermoon. So you can see that like the government and the military of the Night Elves is primarily dominated by women. And then, you know, the males, they tend to be like this sort of natural spiritual side to like the culture, and most of them rest in the Emerald Dream. The males will wake up every now and then, you know, they hang out with all their like females and stuff. Maybe they have some children, probably very rarely though for most of Night Elf history, because up until the end of Warcraft 3 the Night Elves were immortal. So you probably don't want to be having a ton of children when you know that that kid is going to be around for forever. I mean, there's only so many resources, you know what I mean? So kind of gets you thinking a little bit. The point is, this was very interesting stuff. You know, it's like, you know, this like kind of big matriarch society and stuff that's oddly a polygamist one. It's kind of like it kind of gets your gears going. It gets your creativity bubbles, like, you know, bubbling up when it comes to making a roleplay character or something. But then Blizzard will just come in and just retcon it. You know, the Sentinels, you know, there's a ton of dudes in there as well. I mean, look at all these screenshots of dudes in like skimpy armor. Like, what would ever give you the idea that like the Night Elf like Sentinel hood was nothing but women? Like, that's ridiculous. It's not like you played Warcraft 3 where every single archer and like, you know, military unit was a female. Like, what would ever give you the idea that like their military is all female? Anyway, point is, Blizzard's just forgetting their old lore and just retconning all their old stuff, which kind of contributes to them kind of killing the vibe and the tone that they established all those years ago. I could give you like 10,000 examples from like the Warcraft RPG books, from old World of Warcraft lore books and stuff. Man, I got a ton of them. Like, you can actually see them. They're right there. Like, I had all the Warcraft lore books back in the day. I read them constantly, and Blizzard has just retconned. And so when this stuff happens, it's a little bit frustrating. But here's the big one. Blizzard seems to be on this burning crusade, especially over the past several years, of trying to distance themselves further and further and further from what made Warcraft. So many of the things that made people fall in love with World of Warcraft writing and lore, Blizzard has just pretty much said, we don't write like that anymore. We don't want World of Warcraft to be like that nowadays in 2025. And let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. First of all, let's just get this out of the way. The one thing that everyone and their mom likes to point out to Blizzard Entertainment, and that is this: World of Warcraft was built on the backbone of orcs versus humans. It has always been a game about being incredibly racist and xenophobic towards the strange green alien monsters that are on the other side of the battlefield. And since those early RTS days and the earliest days of World of Warcraft, this faction conflict has remained. The Horde versus the Alliance, Tauren and trolls and orcs and stuff versus humans and dwarves and gnomes and elves and whatever. It's been great. It's been freaking awesome. And Blizzard, over all these years, they have been establishing over and over and over just how much these different groups of people absolutely hate each other. The orcs, when they came through the dark portal, they burned Stormwind to the ground, killing who knows how many like numbers of innocent civilians and stuff. I do audiobook readings for like the channel members here on Nixium. We just did Road to Damnation, and I'm currently working on the second one where I'm reading Unbroken. And let me tell you something, if you read the story Unbroken, right, and then you read modern World of Warcraft lore and quests and stuff, it is a completely different ballfield. Let me just show you like some snippets of this video that I'm working on for the channel members. That way you understand what I'm talking about. Now, quick context, the story of Unbroken is about the kind of last remnants of the Draenei trying to survive against the orcish onslaught on Draenor. This is when, in the lore, the orcs became corrupted by the blood of Manaroth, and they go on this like insane rampage trying to wipe out the Draenei race from Draenor. Not like, you know, a couple of like Draenei towns or maybe a city or two, or maybe just like, you know, defeat the Draenei military. every single man, woman, and child. It's a complete freaking genocide of them as an entire people. And that's what Unbroken is about. It's like the remnants trying to survive against this. If you want to read more about it, you can read the book Rise of the Horde. Fun fact, the Path of Glory in Hellfire Peninsula, yeah, look at that path one day, like zoom in your camera and you'll see it's nothing but skeletons. What are these skeletons? Who are all these dead people? That is the remains of the Draenei men, women, and children that the orcs killed in their murderous crusade. Listen to this snippet from the book Unbroken that was written years ago on Blizzard's website.
The entire expanse of Lower City, lit by the moon and ambient firelight from above, had become a dumping ground for the bodies of the butchered Draenei. And though the rain had stopped, the corpse mounds were still slick with vomit and blood and every manner of waste. Nabundo's heart withered at the sight of children among the dead. Despite their youth, many of them had bravely volunteered to stay with their parents, who knew all too well that the orcs would be suspicious of a Draenei city where no children dwelled, and would hunt the last of their kin to extinction. Still, a part of Nabundo hoped and prayed with all his might that the remaining children could be defended, and that they would stay safe in the hiding places that had hastily been dug into the mountains. A foolish hope, he understood, but one he clung to nonetheless. Could anything be more senseless than killing children? Again, his ears were assaulted by the screams of a female, accompanied by taunts and jeers. The orcs were celebrating, reveling in their victory. Looking up, he pinpointed the source of the noise. High above, jutting out from the cliffs of the barrier hills, the Draenei had built Alder Rise. There, the orcs were torturing some poor female Draenei. I must try to stop them. But how? Alone with a broken leg, one against hundreds, one who had been abandoned by the light, armed only with his hammer. How could he stop the madness unfolding above? I must find the way. Frantically, he crawled over the corpses, slipping in the fluids, shutting the putrid stench and raw viscera out of his mind. He worked his way around the outer circle of the lower city, towards the base of the cliffs where the wall met the mountain. He would find a way to climb up there, he would. Screaming stopped. He looked up to see shadows silhouetted by moonlight. They carried a still form to the edge of the overlook, and then swung, tossing the lifeless cargo down into the depths. It landed with a dull thud not far from where Nabundo had lain motionless. He crept forward, looking for any signs of life from the female. Shaka, he determined her name to be when he drew close enough to see her features. He had seen her many times before, though they had only spoken on brief occasions. He'd always found her pleasant and engaging, and now she lay battered and bruised, her throat cut, her lifeblood drained. At least for her, the pain was over. Another scream issued from above, the voice of another female. Rage welled within Nabundo, rage and frustration, and an overwhelming desire for vengeance. There is nothing you can do.
You have a story here, a book about the orcs literally murdering children and gathering up their dead bodies into piles. You have the implication that the orcs have wiped out all of the men and then are having their way with the Draenei women before cutting their throats and throwing their lifeless bodies off the ramparts. Could you imagine Blizzard writing something like this today? There is no way that Blizzard would write something very gritty, dark, and even disturbing. No way. You don't get Stalvin Mistmantle quest lines anymore in World of Warcraft. There was a picture that trended like over on Twitter, or well, X for a while, and it was like Warcraft then versus now. And you see this image of this orc drawn by Chris Metzen where he's decapitating a human Alliance soldier. And then next to him, you kind of have your modern Blizzard 2025 orc that just looks fat, stupid, colorful, cheerful. And the thing that I'm getting at here is you're telling me now that the Draenei and the orcs, okay, are now working together, buddy with each other to fight against Xal'atath's feet. Give me a fucking break, bro. Like, give me a break. Where is the war in Warcraft? There ain't no damn way. Recently, Blizzard released this one hilarious quest chain in the War Within, where Farron Lothar is lectured by Daneth Trollbane. Daneth Trollbane is one of the members of the Sons of Lothar. Now, who are the Sons of Lothar? They were a group of people that were formed that were dedicated to wiping out and defeating the Orcish threat to Azeroth once and for all, right? So in this quest line, this cutscene that Blizzard made, Daneth Trollbane tells Farron, first and foremost, that the Sons of Lothar are an organization of tolerance and mercy. Yeah, okay, sure. He also tells her that you shouldn't take too much pride in who you are and where you come from, because that could lead you to being hostile towards your neighbors. And he looks towards an Orcish base as he does this. You know, that group of people that like you literally have dedicated your life to driving out of Azeroth. Keep in mind too, his name is Daneth Trollbane, okay? Trollbane. Imagine for 1 second, like I came up to you and you were like, oh, hey, my name is so-and-so, what's your name? And I was like, oh, hey, so-and-so, my name is Nixium African American Bane. And you know what? Racism is wrong. And then you'd be like, wow, thanks, Mr. African American Bane. Like, man, you don't have a weird name at all, do you? And I'm like, no, not at all. Blizzard is just trying to look back at that old tone of World of Warcraft that is full of its racism and xenophobia and genocide and mass violence, and just like, yes, on the surface, World of Warcraft had its humor and its silly side and its lighthearted fantasy, but there was some dark stuff in the Warcraft lore if you did a little bit of digging and you paid attention to those quest lines and stuff back in the day, or you even read the World of Warcraft books that Blizzard put out. Like, Warcraft was it was very different back in the day. You know, it was approachable, but there was also a lot of dark stuff in there for those that really went looking and digging for it. But nowadays, it's just a repeated lecture of how we need to all work together like a family in order to defeat evil. There really is very little war in World of Warcraft these days, and it's a little bit disappointing, I admit. It's why I'm such a fan of the old Warcraft lore, and it seems to resonate so much with people that, you know, really get into it. They're just like, man, like there's some really good stuff in here. So not to say, like, I know someone's gonna leave a comment and be like, oh, you know, you're just bad talking the modern game and stuff. There is some good stuff in the modern game and in the modern lore, but a lot of it, like, overall, is just kind of like, it's very weak. I mean, it felt like a World of Warcraft, more proper. Now it kind of feels more like World of Work Together craft, and I'm not a big fan of that. And this whole like Dead Scar retcon thing has just kind of reminded me of how Blizzard is continuously drifting more and more away from like their old established lore and stories and stuff and tone, and it just kind of depresses me, I admit. This is a video that I've probably have been wanting to make now for 5 years, where I just wanted to share this stuff. So maybe you guys will agree with me, maybe you guys will disagree, but I was kind of looking forward to seeing an updated Dead Scar and Quel'thalas and fighting against the pockets of like the Scourge and stuff, while also fighting against like the forces of the Void. I thought that was going to be really cool, but apparently that's not the case. So a little bit disappointing, I admit, but what are you going to do? Thank you guys though for listening to my World of Warcraft lore ramble and listening to me kind of geek out and get passionate about something that most of you probably don't even care about. But you know, for me, it was like my childhood, man. Like, you know, it was like Warcraft lore, you know, Loktar Ogar and stuff. Like, I was like so passionate about it, and, you know, just seeing it kind of like, you know, become so safe.